You are accelerating for takeoff and reach the rotation speed. You pull on the control wheel, but the nose doesn't lift. What do you do? Hi, my name is Madang Airport. I am a captain and instructor on ATR 42 and 72 airplanes. Today I will talk about the importance of loading the airplanes correctly and what can happen if we exceed the limitations. On the 19th of October 2013, an ATR 42 320F aborted the takeoff at Madang Airport in Papua New Guinea. It failed to stop and ended up in a creek. The airplane was damaged by a post-crash fire. The crew members escaped with none or minor injuries. The accident report has a clear conclusion. The airplane was not loaded in accordance with the instructions from the captain. As a result, the center of gravity was forward of the limitation, and the pilot was not able to rotate the nose at takeoff. Personally, I have experienced a similar incident, but not with such grave consequences. When it comes to loading an airplane, there are some very important limitations. The accident airplane had a maximum takeoff weight, MTOW, of 16,900 kilos. But that doesn't mean you can take off with that weight every time. Before you take off, you have to calculate the regulatory takeoff weight, RTOW. It is limited by the max takeoff weight, runway conditions, the weather, obstacles, and the technical condition of the airplane. If you want to learn more about takeoff performance, please check this video. I put a link below. For this flight, the captain calculated the regulatory takeoff weight to be 16,606 kilograms, which is 294 kilograms below max takeoff weight. The airplane's dry operating weight was 10,246 kilos. It was loaded with 2,650 kilograms of fuel, and this allowed for a payload of 3,710 kilos. Each zone of the cargo compartment is limited by the strength of the floor, the strength of the net separating each zone, and the tie down when used. Finally, the airplane must be loaded within the limitations for the center of gravity, CG, which is shown in this graph. The limitations are given in percentage of the mean aerodynamic chord, MAC. The MAC is the average chord of the wing. On ATR 42, the length of the MAC is 2.285 meters. Here is an interesting fact. Most airplanes have the best flight characteristics when the CG is located near 25% MAC. Therefore, 25 MAC is defined as a neutral point when it comes to center of gravity. For example, many performance data are determined with the CG as 25% MAC. Here is the allowable CG range for an ATR 42 320. In the center, we have 25% MAC. The forward limitation is 15% MAC, and the aft limitation is 36% MAC. Maximum zero fuel weight is 15,540 kilograms. The zero fuel weight is the airplane's weight with empty fuel tanks. It is limited by the bending moment of the wings. Max landing weight is 16,400 kilos, and max takeoff weight is 16,900 kilos. As you can see, at max takeoff weight, the forward limitation is reduced to 18% MAC, and the aft limitation is 29% MAC. This has mainly to do with the authority of the elevator. At the bottom of the figure is the index number. It is a function of the takeoff weight and the MAC, and is used to define the pitch trim for takeoff. Ahead and behind the maximum values are buffer zones of 3 and 2% respectively. This allows for people to move around in the cabin during flight. While the center of gravity range appears to be wide on this figure, it is in fact this narrow green band. So, what happens if you exceed those limitations? When we plan a flight, we assume that an engine will fail at the worst possible moment at takeoff. This gives us the regulatory takeoff weight. If an airplane is heavier than the regulatory takeoff weight, you may face several problems. First of all, the acceleration is reduced and you will reach V1, the decision speed, later. If an engine fails just before V1, you may stop, but since your airplane is too heavy, you have already used more runway than planned, and you might not have sufficient distance to stop. And if an engine fails at or after V1, you must continue the takeoff, but you may not climb as well as you should. You might not be able to climb at all. Now, what if the center of gravity is too far ahead? To find the answer, we must have a look at the horizontal stabilizer and the elevator. During normal flight, the center of gravity is ahead of the lift center. This creates a nose-down moment. For example, if the mass of the airplane is 15,000 kilograms, then the weight is 147,000 Newton. Yes, we say weight, but we should strictly use the term mass. But okay. Now, if the arm is 0.5 meters ahead of the lift center, then the moment is 73,500 Newton meter. The job of the stabilizer is to contract this moment by producing a downward force. If the horizontal stabilizer is 10 meters after the lift center, then it must also produce a moment of 73,500 Newton meters. The downward force is then 7,350 Newton. If the center of gravity is moved forwards, the downward force produced by the horizontal stabilizer must be increased accordingly. For example, if you move the center of gravity 1 meter ahead of the lift center, the moment will be 147,000 Newton meter. The horizontal stabilizer must now produce 14,700 Newton. The problem is, there is a limitation for how much down force the horizontal stabilizer can produce. When this limitation is exceeded, the consequences might be any of the following. 1. The airplane doesn't rotate when it should. It might become airborne at a higher speed when the elevator gets more authority, if you have enough runway, or it may not become airborne at all. 2. When you land, you may not be able to hold the nose up as the speed decreases, but will land on the nose wheel. 3. Since the wing must produce extra lift to compensate for the extra high downforce from the tail, climb performance and cruise performance will be degraded. What happens if you move the center of gravity aft towards the lift center? Since the horizontal stabilizer will produce less downforce, the performance will improve. But as the center of gravity moves aft, the control forces become lighter and lighter, until you reach a point where it's impossible to control the airplane manually. This is a desired condition for a modern fighter jet. But fighter jets rely on computers to fly. If those computers fail, the pilot has to bail out. However, this is not an option for an airliner. It must be able to fly safely without computers. Therefore, instability is not an option. On the accident flight, the mass of the airplane was above regulatory takeoff weight and the center of gravity was too far ahead. It was not possible for the horizontal stabilizer to produce enough downforce to rotate the airplane's nose up. This left the captain with only one option. He had to stop. But because of the overweight, they had already used more runway than planned. Furthermore, it takes a few seconds to realize what's happening and then react. By then, they were beyond the point where they should have been airborne, and there was not enough runway for stopping. To make it worse, the anti-skid was inoperative, which made it harder to stop. According to the minimum equipment list, you are allowed to depart with the anti-skid inoperative, but you must add 300 to 400 meters to the accelerated stop distance. The accident report does not mention whether the captain included this in his computation for takeoff. But even if he did, there wasn't enough runway to stop. Or was it? There were no skid marks on the runway. The airplane exited the runway end, went down the embankment, through a fence and into a creek. The right wing caught fire. However, the airport fire service was able to limit the damage to that side. The cockpit was partially submerged, and the crew escaped through the escape hatch in the ceiling. The first officer received light injuries. The captain and an observer escaped without injury. Shortly after, bystanders began to loot the airplane. The cargo was cigarettes. About 1/3 of the cargo was looted from the airplane. This made it harder for the investigators to reconstruct the distribution of the load. The investigators concluded that the most forward part of the cargo compartment, Zone A, was loaded with 1,136 kilograms instead of 350 kilograms as stated in the weight and balance sheet. Several errors were made. At the time of the accident, the company did not have proper ground handling procedures for the ATR operation to ensure the safe load distribution of freight loaded into the aircraft. Furthermore, there was no proper procedure for the flight crew to check the load distribution. The manufacturer of the cargo had declared that the weight was 12 kilos per carton. However, this was the net weight. The shipper did not weigh the cartons, but assumed that the gross weight was 12 kilos, while it was close to 13 kilos. The captain ordered 350 kilos to be loaded in Zone A. The first officer wrote this number in the weight and balance sheet. But somewhere along the road, the message from the captain did not reach the persons responsible for loading the airplane. The more errors you make, the higher the risk for accidents. The captain determined that they could load a maximum 3,710 kilos. And the captain instructed the supervisor to load 350 kilos, 30 cartons in Zone A. The first officer made the weight and balance sheet. In Zone A, there was 350 kilos. In Zone B, C, and D, there were 800. In Zone E, 600. And in Zone F, 360 kilos. Total load, 3,710 kilos. The airplane was loaded with 330 cartons. If the weight of each cartons had been 12 kilos, the total weight would have been 3,960 kilos. That's 250 kilos more than instructed by the captain. But the actual weight of the load was 4,300 kilos, which was 593 kilos overweight. Even worse, in Zone A, they loaded 87 cartons instead of the 30 cartons as requested by the captain. The load and balance sheet showed 350 kilos, but the actual weight was 1,136 kilos. That's 786 kilos more than calculated in the weight and balance sheet. And this grossly affected the center of gravity. The weight and balance calculation is not included in the accident report. Therefore, I don't know the exact location of the center of gravity. However, I have flown this airplane in a passenger configuration. Here is the balance sheet we used. If we assume that the MAC was calculated to be 25%, the pitch trim will have been set to 0. And if we assume that the cargo compartment in the passenger version is close to Zone A in the cargo version, the extra 786 kilos will have moved the CG to 17%. In this case, the pitch trim should have been set to plus 3.5. But even so, it would have been outside the limitation of the weight and balance sheet. The airplane would have been able to take off if the trim had been set to plus 3.5, but this did not happen. Therefore, the pilot was not able to rotate the nose up at takeoff. As I said before, I have experienced a similar loading incident. Once upon a time, long time ago, I was captain of an A372 where the checked-in baggage were loaded in the aft cargo compartment instead of the forward cargo compartment, as stated in the weight and balance sheet. The weight and balance sheet showed that we had about 30 passengers and 220 kilos baggage in the forward cargo compartment. The takeoff weight was about 18 tons and the center of gravity was calculated to be close to 25% MAC. My first officer was pilot flying, and on rotation, the nose came up very quickly. The first officer was able to push the control wheel forward and maintain control. Quickly he trimmed the airplane. The remainder of the flight was normal. After landing, we discovered that the bags were loaded in the aft compartment. So instead of this, we had this. The MAC was 34.5%. An internal investigation revealed that the loading supervisor was not properly trained. So what can we learn from this? First of all airline companies need proper ground handling procedures to ensure the safe load distribution of freight loaded into the aircraft. But it doesn't stop there. The distribution of passengers in the cabin is equally important. Therefore, the cabin crew must have a procedure to check where the passengers are seated. This is fairly easy in an ATR, as the cabin is divided into just 3 zones, so you can count the number of passengers in zone A, B and C. And I have an advice for you. Next time you travel as a passenger with an airliner and you want to move to another empty seat, maybe because it's an empty row, please wait until the seatbelt light is switched off after takeoff. Then it's safe to move around. Please don't argue with the cabin attendant that it won't make any difference if you just move a couple of rows. The cabin crew is not trained to calculate the weight and balance of an airplane. They don't know when a reshuffling of the passenger will affect the center of gravity and therefore change the trim setting for takeoff. Therefore, they will tell you to sit where you are supposed to sit. Their job is to keep you safe. Thank you. And that's all for this time. Please support my channel by clicking like, subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you for watching, have a wonderful day and happy landing!